Hello, and welcome to the Quietly Visible podcast. I'm your host, Carol Stewart, founder of the Bounding Solutions and author of Quietly Visible, Leading with Influence and Impact as an Introverted Woman. This is the podcast for introverted women who want to thrive as leaders and in life. Now, today's topic I'm talking about is something that I see time and time again in the leaders that I coach, but it's something that isn't often talked about. And that is regarding attachment style and particularly focusing on leaders that have an insecure attachment style and how they can develop a more secure attachment style, which will also help you to develop a more secure mindset. And why does this matter? Leadership isn't just about strategy and skills. You may have heard me talk a lot about the soft skills. Well, I don't particularly like the term soft skills. Because they aren't. When people talk about soft skills, they are often not given the priority that they need. They are actually essential skills for leaders. And so when it comes to leadership, as I've said, it's not just about strategy and skills, hard skills. It's about how we relate to others, how we handle feedback and give feedback, and how we manage their thoughts and emotions, and how we self-regulate, and all those things which are not tangible, but which are essential for us to being influential, for us being confident, for us being impactful, for us having a leadership presence, and for us being effective leaders. Because as a leader, and it's not just as a leader in your work life, but also when it comes to your personal relationships, being able to interact and engage and have secure relationships important as well. So those skills are applicable not just for work but personally as well. And so what are attachment styles and where do they come from? Just to give a quick overview of attachment styles and what they are and why they matter, they are developed from our early life experiences, and in particular, how we bonded with our caregivers as children. And so our early relationships play a big part in how we are emotionally as adults. And these early relationships shape how we handle trust, how we have belief in ourselves, how we connect with others, how we manage conflict. As I said, it's not just in working in teams, also in personal relationships as well. And I won't go into the whole history of where the theory came from, but just to give you an overview. There are four main attachment styles. They secure attachment, anxious attachment, avoidant attachment, and fearful avoidant attachment. And so secure attachment, that's formed when the caregivers are consistently responsive and supportive. They're nurturing, they're responsive, they attend to our needs, they comfort us, they make us feel secure. Anxious attachment, that develops when the care that we had was inconsistent, and that can lead to a deep need for reassurance, seeking approval, wanting that constant reassurance. Attachment, that comes from emotionally distant or unavailable caregivers. So they may be present, but physically they're present, but emotionally they're distant. And so that shows us that, or helps us not want to sort of form close connections and attachments. And fearful avoidant attachment, that is often linked to unpredictable or even traumatic early experiences. And whilst these patterns start in childhood, they're not set in stone, and that's a good thing. Once we have an awareness of them, the good news is that we can develop more secure leadership habits with awareness and with practice. And so if you're an introverted woman in leadership, or even if you're not in a leadership role, but you're striving for a leadership role, I want to explore how attachment styles may be influencing you and what you can do about it. So when it comes to secure attachment, that is the ideal, but it's not always the reality. For many, many people, it's not the reality because there are many of us who have not had that secure attachment formed in our early lives. And it's something I see time and time again in coaching, as I said. And oftentimes it's not that parents or carers didn't love us, it's not that they didn't care about us. It was often that they themselves were just doing the best with what they knew how based on their experiences from their caregivers. And when people who have an insecure attachment style, that's likely, unless they become aware that that is what is happening with them, and have that awareness of what it means to have secure attachment and how to raise children to have a secure attachment, unless they have that awareness, that it's likely to be the same learned behavior that is passed on to their children. So I'll give you an example using my situation. I would say that I probably veered towards avoidance attachment. And, as a child, I didn't really understand why that was. My parents, were providers, they worked hard, they loved us, me and my siblings, but they didn't necessarily show their love through hugs and that sort of thing, or even sort of getting down on the fourth floor playing with us. As a child, I didn't understand that. I'd look at friends and see how their parents were rolling around outside with them, playing with them. I never got that. And that kind of love, which I didn't necessarily see, even though as I became an adult, I recognized that my parents loved me dearly, but I realized that that was based on their upbringing and also them not necessarily having that knowledge that secure attachment or how to children and nurture them so that they have a secure attachment style. When it came to me having my son, I was more aware, even though back then I didn't really fully have the knowledge that I have about attachment style. I just knew that I wanted to be able to show my affection to my son. So there was lots of hugs when he was a child, when he was little, lots of telling him I loved him, lots of playing with him and doing those things with him. And so he probably had more of a secure attachment, although I will have to ask him because I could be seeing it totally different to what he is. And so when it comes to anxious attachment, that's where you often see people who are people pleasing or over analyzing things. And anxious leaders may overthink decisions, they seek approval, and they struggle with imposter syndrome. And it's something that I do still coach leaders that have both an anxious attachment and avoidant attachment and fearful avoidant attachment. But when I look back on the leaders that I coach, I would say there's probably more that I coach with anxious attachment. And so things like apologetic language, I see a lot in those leaders with anxious attachment styles, and that's because they not without realizing it, not wanting to offend, they're wanting to people please. So I had one client who I would say their style was anxious attachment, maybe even a bit of fearful avoidant attachment as well. Her mother had abandoned her as a child because she couldn't cope, she couldn't look after her. And she, as a child, you don't understand these things. And as a result, she always thought that her mum didn't love her, that her mum rejected her. And as an adult, this was seen in her behaviour, imposter syndrome, always seeking approval. And what happens with leaders, they can overthink decisions and seek validation. And another client who was anxious had an anxious attachment style. She would seek approval from her manager. And the thing is, her manager, I believe, had an avoidant attachment style. So she wouldn't give that approval. She It's difficult to give praise or to give my client praise. So my client would expect that she would get praise for something that she'd done, or at least that was well done. When other people were giving her that sort of feedback, she wasn't getting that from her line manager. And because she had an anxious attachment style, it was like she was seeking approval from her manager, that she wanted to she was very concerned that her manager wouldn't like certain things, or her manager wouldn't approve. And so that's where the different dynamics come into play. And by understanding what someone else's attachment style may be, that can help you with your interpersonal relationships and how you manage your relationships, how you lead your team, if you have an awareness of what their attachment styles may be. And in the Quietly Visible LinkedIn newsletter, you will see that I am writing about this over the coming months. You will hear me talk more about it. And with anxious attachment style, they can fear conflict, and so may hesitate to assert authority. And this is something that many of my clients will be in meetings, and this is before they come to coaching. Once they've had coaching, they are able to develop more of a secure attachment style and feel more confident in themselves, believe more in themselves. But prior to that, they may not assert themselves in meetings because they fear that someone may judge them, they fear that someone may, and they are fearful of conflict. So they don't necessarily assert their authority. And then there's avoidant attachment, where leaders who have this attachment style, they value independence and they struggle with showing vulnerability, and they may find it hard to delegate or build close relationships with their team. And because there's that lack of trust, an example of a particular client with this was a leader who kept her distance from people in terms of forming those interpersonal connections and developing those relationships that would enable her to do better collaborations, that would enable her to develop her team better. And for her, she grew up in a household where there was that lack of affection, there was that lack of love, or that demonstration of love, where children should be seen and not heard type of thing. So leaders with an avoidant attachment style, they prefer their independence, as I said. They struggle with delegation, they avoid emotional discussions, and they can seem distant or unapproachable to their teams or to other people. And leaders that are fearful avoidant, they can feel torn between wanting connection, but yet they fear rejection. And that can lead to inconsistencies in how they approach things, in their leadership approach. So they're wanting to connect, they're wanting to form bonds, but because of fear of rejection or criticism, that gives that conflict, that inner conflict with them. And having given those 4 styles, attachment styles, which one resonates with you? Do any of them resonate with you? Can you see them in yourself? Can you see them in people that you lead? Can you see them in your personal relationships? Having that awareness of your style, your attachment style, and other people's, and thinking about the dynamics of it, using the example that I gave you of the client that I had who had anxious attachment style, but their line manager had an avoidant attachment style. Initially, my client thought that, well, that person didn't see that they were doing any good. They thought that they probably weren't as good as what they should be, because they weren't getting any affirmation from their line manager. So it was a matter of them coming to understand and realize that they don't need validation from their line manager. The only person they need validation from is themselves, and understanding that their line manager, because they appear to have an avoidant attachment style, would feel uncomfortable getting close or giving them that praise that they needed. So can you see how that can affect the dynamics of the relationship? And I would love to have coached the line manager, because if they understood that their style was avoidant and that they were avoiding that connection, they were avoiding delegating so that my client could develop themselves, because my client wanted to get to the next level, but their line manager wasn't giving them those opportunities. So which one resonates with you? Let me know, either by commenting or reaching out to me and letting me know. And so if we look at some of the challenges for introverted women leaders who have an insecure attachment. So if you go back to attachment styles, you have secure attachment and you have the insecure attachment style. And within the insecure attachment, there is the anxious attachment, there's the avoidance attachment, and there's the fearful avoidant attachment styles. And so some of the challenges for introverted women leaders with insecure attachment can relate to the double pressure that they experience because of their introversion, and introversion not being valued in a lot of workplaces, extroversion being favored. Add that to an insecure attachment, what do you expect happens? So they may feel drained by constant social interaction, hesitant to self promote or take up space, and they can be overshadowed by a more extroverted or dominant personalities. One of the things that I often find in these sorts of scenarios is where there are more extroverted or authoritative, dominant personalities in the room, those with the insecure attachment remain quiet. They don't speak up. They don't assert themselves. They let other people take their ideas, and they are overshadowed by them. And that has an impact on how, if this is you, this will have an impact on how you are seen as a leader. It will have an impact on the presence that you have as a leader. It will have an impact on the authority that you have as a leader. And I talked about assertiveness. So with insecure attachment, you can struggle when it comes to assertiveness. So anxious leaders may fear disappointing others, and so therefore they avoid those tough conversations. They keep stum. Avoidant leaders may keep people at a distance. So their team members, they may keep at a distance. Their colleagues, they may keep at a distance instead of building trust. When it comes to handling feedback and conflict, anxious attachment styles may take criticism personally. They may ruminate. Those with an avoidant reaction to when it comes to handling feedback and conflict may shut down and disengage from difficult conversations. And those who are fearful avoidant, they want they want their feedback, but they fear the judgment that may come with it, which can lead to indecision. So if you want to cultivate a secure leadership mindset, self-awareness is key. So recognizing your attachment style without judgment, don't judge yourself about it, and ask yourself, how does this impact your leadership decisions and your relationship? And also, not just your work relationships, but your personal relationships as well. Build that internal confidence. So instead of seeking external validation, build your internal confidence. And you will have heard me talk before about how much the way that we think affects how we feel and how we act and behave according to how we're feeling. So it's about recognizing the thoughts that you have and the beliefs that you have, constant reassurance. And that's what I do time and time again with my coaching clients, help them to see that they are achieving the results that are expected. They're often going over and beyond in terms of what they're achieving, and meeting targets or whatever their objectives are. So they don't need that validation or that external validation. So the client I mentioned who had the avoidant line manager, she knew that she was getting results. She knew that her team were highly motivated, were engaged, were high performing. So she knew that she was making an impact with her team, with stakeholders. She didn't need that validation from her line manager saying, well done. As yes, it would be nice. And then we also looked at how she could get that feedback from her by letting her know what she needs, by letting her know that, asking her, well, how do you think I've done about this? Or that sort of way, so that she can get some sort of clarification from her manager as to how her manager sees her work, has to get some of that feedback. Another thing is to celebrate the small wins. So say you handled a difficult conversation well, just celebrating that. Oh, I handled that difficult conversation really well. And strengthen your communication and presence. So for anxious leaders, prepare what you want to say before speaking, use power language instead of apologetic language, or hedging yourself. For avoidant leaders, practice more moments of connection with your team. One particular client who struggled with this, one of the things that she started to do was just on the odd occasion go for lunch, or say, oh, let's go to for lunch with colleagues or team members, and just started doing little things like that just to help to form those connections, because that lack of connection was having a big impact for her. And for fearful avoidant leaders, seek consistency in how you engage with your team. And so it's about finding leadership strategies that work for you, as well. So using things like written communication to reinforce the verbal messages that you've given, and trying to, or not trying, but rather but creating one-to-one interactions rather than large group discussions, which can be overwhelming. So think about how you can make those one-to-one connections. And that's something, and another client who had challenges with this, they identified who those people were in their organization that they wanted to form those connections with, and they developed a strategy how they could have those one-to-one interactions. It was a bit difficult because they worked hybrid, and although they're required to be in the office 3 days a week, not everybody is in on the same 3 days. So those people are not necessarily going to be in on the days that they were in. But what they did was I developed a strategy on how they could just connect to those people. And if they found that they weren't going to be in the office at the same time, they would set up a virtual chat with them. And for all leaders, set clear boundaries to prevent burnout. Now, boundaries are so important because, particularly for those I find with a anxious attachment style, those boundaries become very blurred because they want to please everybody. They don't want to say no to people, so the boundaries become blurred. So they're taking on more than what they can handle. They're working longer hours to get through it all, and it is stressful. And if it continues, it can lead to burnout. So boundaries are important. And develop secure relationships with your peers and find mentors, and surround yourself with secure leaders who model those healthy behaviors so that you can watch and learn and observe how they are, and get constructive feedback without over analyzing it. Ask for constructive feedback. And if you get given feedback that is vague, that isn't clear, that isn't specific, that isn't timely, ask for it to be more specific. So someone says, oh, you didn't do something, but they're not clear or specific about it. Ask them, well, when was it? What were the behaviours that you weren't displaying, or what it was that you weren't doing? So feedback is good, but it does need to be specific, and it needs to be timely, and it needs to be constructive. And remember that leadership is a skill that can be developed. Attachment styles are not set in stone if you have an awareness about them. When you don't have an awareness about if you have an insecure attachment style, you don't have an awareness about it, then it will be like it is set in stone. But once you develop that awareness of it and you identify the behaviors and why you're acting and interacting and like that, it's so much more easier for you to change it. And this is something which, it's not going to happen overnight. However, if you're in your 30s, your 40s, your 50s, 60s, however old you are, that is something that you have been for your lifetime. So it's not going to change overnight, and it's not necessarily going to be something that, like, right, I'll work on this now and that's it, I'm set for life, because it's something that you will need to be mindful of, because different environments, different personalities, different situations can revert you back to that insecure style. So I like to describe it as a muscle. So if you think of a bodybuilder who has to constantly work to keep their muscles big or shaped, or whatever the word is, they can't do a workout, get their muscles into shape, and then not do anything for 6 months, because then they will become out of shape. It's something that they have to work on constantly. And with this, I'm not saying that you've got to be every minute thinking about it. It's just that you need to be mindful and you need to be aware. And so once you've developed that awareness and you see yourself reverting to that insecure style, it's about recognizing what is going on. So you may find that you go for months and months and months and you're feeling very secure. And that is displayed in your behavior, it's displayed in your interaction. And something may happen. You may have a setback, you may come across a particular type of person, it may be something that triggers something in your subconscious mind. You're back to where you were. But if you have that awareness, if you are self-aware and you regularly self-reflect your behaviors and your thinking and why you're acting and reacting the way that you are, you'll be more mindful. And once you've gone through that process of identifying, increasing your self-awareness, identifying what you can do, then when you do, and when and if it does happen that you find yourself regressing, hopefully your awareness means that you can put things in play so that you are able to manage it. And the thing what I would like to say before I finish is emotions are powerful. Negative emotions can be debilitating. When you have anxious attachment style, when you have avoidant attachment style, when you have fearful avoidant attachment style, you can have some very strong emotions that feel compelling, that hold you back or make you do things in a way that you wouldn't do if you had a more secure attachment style. And it's recognizing that those emotions and your reaction to those emotions were something that has developed from your early experiences. And as a child or as an infant or as someone who was young, who was experiencing this, they were probably a form of protection for you, so that you wouldn't get hurt. You wouldn't get emotionally hurt. So you put up these barriers around you, these emotional barriers, as a form of protection. But the thing is, they're not necessarily serving you now. And so don't be afraid of those emotions. The thing is recognizing that that's what they are. They are emotions, and emotions are fleeting. Like the wind, they're here today, they're gone tomorrow. They chop and change. And so it's about recognizing that and also not being so hard on yourself. And sometimes it's a matter of just feeling the emotion, observing the emotion, acknowledging the emotion, and just taking a step back from it and observing yourself, observing that emotion and what it is that you're feeling. And that can help you to distance yourself from the emotion so that you're not so caught up in the emotion that you can take that step back and yes, I want this person hasn't acknowledged me, or they haven't validated me, they haven't told me that I'm good or that what I've done is good. So I'm feeling insecure, I'm feeling that I'm not good enough. Just recognize that that is what you're thinking, acknowledge that is what you're thinking, but at the same time tell yourself that yes, I feel that way. However, there's a lot of evidence to show that I've achieved this, I've done that, I've done that. I don't need that validation from that person. Once you can get into the habit of doing that and recognizing what is going on, it will get easier. Well, it will hopefully get easier. And it's all about that self-reflection, making that time for self-reflection to increase your self-awareness about what is going on for you. So remember, your attachment style affects how you lead, but it doesn't define you unless you let it. So start recognizing your patterns and making small shifts towards more secure leadership style, secure leadership behaviors. So which insight resonated most with you? Let me know by either connecting with me on LinkedIn and letting me know, or putting comments YouTube or Spotify and letting me know. So thank you for listening. And if you're wanting to increase your confidence, influence and impact, and if you haven't completed the free assessment on my website, go to aboundingsolutions.com. Under the free resources, there's an assessment that you can complete that will give you ideas about areas that you can focus on. So until the next time, bye.